Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to call this hearing to order. I am particularly pleased to welcome back to our hearing room Assistant Administrator Radhika Pfas. After your confirmation hearing, we took a vote off the record, secret ballot, and voted that you have the coolest name of any nominee become before us in a long time. But as you well know, Ms. Fox, we're all quite interested to learn more about EPA's plan to tackle complicated challenges associated with the presence of forever chemicals known as Pfas in the environment and in our lives. I very much appreciate your leadership in pulling EPA's strategic roadmap together to confront PFAS contamination head on. As a former naval flight officer, I flew with confidence that firefighting crews on the ground would have the backs of my air crew and others in the event of an accident. After all, the firefighting crews had a PFAS-containing foam that could be dispensed and used to extinguish fires, in many cases quickly. Like most Americans, I welcome many of the products created through modern chemistry, from non-stick pans and waterproof jackets to stain-proof furniture, fabric, and even dental floss. My guess is that every one of us in this room have maybe used one of these products even today. Some amazing stuff. It can resist sticky and staining food while smothering flames and lasting seemingly forever. But that's not all these chemicals can do. Because they are so persistent, hence the name forever chemicals, the lion's share of these substances do not break down in the environment. Instead, what they do is accumulate. And where do they accumulate? Well, they accumulate in plants, in animals, and ultimately in our bodies, and in the bodies of our children and our grandchildren. In fact, according to the Center for Disease Control, 97% of us carry PFAS inside of our bodies. And several of these forever chemicals have proven to be toxic, causing, among other maladies, liver damage, thyroid disease, fertility problems, immune issues, and even cancer. There's no question that these chemicals are widely used, and understandably so. Since the 1940s, it's estimated that more than 9,000 PFAS chemicals have been manufactured and used in a variety of industries around the world. And creative chemists are finding ever more uses for these chemicals, from enabling lighter weight materials for our electric vehicles, better components for the batteries of the future, to high efficiency methods for cooling huge and energy hungry servers to keep us connected. Embracing the miracle of modern chemistry comes with a price, though, and a grave responsibility. We have to keep the lessons of Parkersburg, West Virginia, Hoosick Falls, New York, and Cape Fear in North Carolina fresh in our minds as we in government, in business, and in communities across the country plot our course going forward. As has so often been the case, many times we embrace the miracles of modern chemistry before we fully understand the complete consequences of doing so. Remember chemicals like PCBs, DDT, and dioxin. Sadly, with PFAS, as with many of its predecessors, we have invested billions of dollars to develop the chemistry and not enough in anticipating and preventing their adverse effects. So that leaves us with a grave predicament on our hands and an extraordinarily complex and expensive process to deal with. And that brings us to the topic of our hearing today. And we are extremely grateful to you, Ms. Fox, and all the hardworking career staff at EPA for investing the time to thoughtfully and strategically address our daunting PFAS challenges, not only the legacy of past contamination in our land, in our waters, in our bodies, but also the future threats posed by our ongoing and future use of these compounds. And we've heard from the witnesses who participated in our hearing on PFAS contamination earlier this year. Americans deserve a robust national strategy when it comes to addressing this pervasive public health threat. And while I'm encouraged by EPA's issuance of a new PFAS roadmap, the key to meaningful change lies in its timely, complete implementation. And this will no doubt be a heavy lift, especially for EPA, but also for the rest of us. And Ranking Member Capito, sitting here to my right, I just want to say that I look forward to working with you on this this challenge, along with all of our other EPW colleagues and our Senate colleagues who are not members of this committee, and with other stakeholders in order to support and supplement EPA's work as needed to ensure that we avoid the mistakes and heartbreak we have witnessed with novel compounds too often in the past. With that, I'm going to recognize our ranking member, Senator Capito, for her opening statement. But before I do, let me just note that Senator Capito has unfortunately had a great deal of experience in my native state of West Virginia with PFAS pollution in the Mountain State. And I want to thank her for her leadership on this important issue, this important matter, and to acknowledge the suffering of her constituents in far too many families and far too communities across our country. So thank you, and we look forward to working with you and getting more good stuff done.
Thank
you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, for calling this hearing today, and thank you, Assistant Administrator Fox, for being here to discuss, as the Chairman said, EPA's efforts to address PFAS, including the new PFAS strategic roadmap that was just released earlier in the week. But before I turn to PFAS, I would like to take a moment to thank you for all of the agency's efforts in helping us to deal with the lead issues that were discovered in Clarksburg, West Virginia. While there remains some process questions about how we got where we are, I appreciate EPA's close coordination with the state of West Virginia and the city of Clarksburg to ensure that the citizens of Clarksburg have safe drinking water. So thank you for that. As you know, addressing PFAS contamination is extremely important to me and has been one of my highest priorities as EPA or EPW ranking member. EPA has been working hard to understand and address PFAS for many years now and across multiple administrations. And I would note there is increased interest and increased awareness among our membership here in the Senate of the pervasiveness of PFAS and in what forms. So while I applaud all the EPA for the progress, I think much work remains. Of utmost importance to me is that EPA expeditiously sets a drinking water standard for two specific PFAS, PFOS and PFOA. This has been a longstanding priority of mine through the past administration, and this one we've talked about it on the phone, and I am pleased that the Biden administration has stated it will complete these standards in the roadmap under a process initiated by the Trump administration. I also appreciated that the White House and EPA specifically responded quickly to my February 17th letter by lifting the Biden administration's freeze on promulgating those regulations. It's vital that Americans have safe drinking water, and these regulations will help to ensure that. And I look forward to hearing an update. I do have some issues with the roadmap because it touches on a whole host of EPA offices and statutory authorities, and often the details, particularly on timing within the document, are vague and several years down the line. The American people deserve to have the transparency into how EPA plans to address these regulatory matters, when and how the science will be to leading to those conclusions and outcomes. I look forward to hearing detailed updates on other potential regulatory actions and PFAS's and EPA's PFAS research activities in your office and others, which I know are necessary to form the basis of appropriate federal action. Back in April, I wrote to EPA requesting an update on the agency's research initiatives. I was a bit disappointed that EPA's reply did not really get into provide any of the specificity of the information that I had requested. As I had stated in my April letter, many of the regulatory and enforcement actions the federal government and states may pursue hinge on continued research. Quite simply, we need a more in-depth understanding of the chemistry and environmental and health challenges posed by this broad class of compounds. The roadmap, released only on Monday, fails to describe what new research or technological breakthroughs are triggering or modifying EPA's approach to addressing PFAS. As EPA stated, quote, robust research is a prerequisite to improving EPA's understanding of the risks associated with PFAS and helping the agency make more informed decisions to protect public health. I assure you, Administrator Fox, that we are prepared to I hope that you are prepared to share the current status and current expected completion dates for EPA's incomplete research and regulatory efforts today, and why, after a history of missed internal deadlines on this issue, keeping in mind that you probably weren't there when they were missed, we would expect something different. It is vital that EPA ensures that science and not politics is driving the regulatory decisions. My colleagues and I cannot determine that this is the case with this administration without improved transparency and the latest information from EPA dealing with what the agency knows, what it does not know, and how progress is being made. I've helped ensure that EPA has the necessary authorities to fill any information gaps related to PFAS. PFAS legislation that I drafted, the PFAS Release Disclosure and Protection Act, was approved by this committee and ultimately signed into law in the NDAA fiscal year 2020. Some of these authorities are listed in the PFAS Strategic Roadmap. One of the reporting requirements in my legislation was that companies comply with a one-time reporting event for PFAS manufactured since January 1, 2011. EPA has proposed a rule to implement that requirement this summer, and I thank you for that. I hope the information that the agency will obtain from this reporting and others like TRI and TSCA Section 8 will better inform the agency as it determines how to best address the challenges of PFAS contamination. As I believe we all know, and the chairman stated this as well, PFAS is present all over this country and all over the world with background levels of contamination from a multitude of sources. This is a very complex issue. But the actual threats to human health and the immediate environment can be highly localized. This is exactly why a deliberative science-based approach to testing and remediation is necessary. Lastly, with plenty of misinformation out there, appropriate risk communication from the federal government is critical. We talked about this on the phone for helping our constituents understand and address this PFAS pollution. So I look forward to hearing updates on each of these important issues, and I thank you again for coming.
Thanks, Senator Capito. Senator Capito knows, and our colleagues know, Senator Inhofe, who used to be the chairman of this committee and is still a valued member of this committee, he spent a lot of his life in airplanes, flying all over this country and around the world. And I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you were here, Jim, when I mentioned this, but during my time as a naval flight officer, we had some, I was stationed in Moffett Field, California, when we were in Southeast Asia. We were in Moffett Field, which is close to Mountain View, just south of San Francisco. And one day, driving to work to join my crew and go for a flight, as we approached the base, you could see black smoke coming up as I was driving down Route 101. And I got closer and closer and got to the main gate to go in. And I said, what's going on? What has happened here? And as it turned out, we had parallel runways, and the traffic controller was bringing in two airplanes, one a big NASA plane and one a smaller Navy P-3 aircraft. And instead of keeping them on separate parallel runways, put them both on the same runway. And the larger NASA plane literally landed on top of the Navy P-3. I think we lost 15 lives that morning, 15 lives. And within minutes, the fire rescue crews were out there spraying down the planes with firefighting foam, trying to save as many lives as they can. Fast forward to about, 8 or 9 years ago, I'm in Delaware, driving to southern Delaware and coming down Route 1 just past Dover and going right by Dover Air Force Base. And just as I get south of Dover Air Force, which I see black smoke coming up just off of State Route 1. And as it turned out, a C-5, a huge, maybe the largest airplane in the world, where we have C-5s and C-17s at Dover. C-5 had loaded up that morning to fly around the world, go over the top of the world, to go to Afghanistan, I believe. And so they had a full bag of fuel, full load of cargo, and they got their clearance, took off. And as they climbed out the air, the engineer, we have 4 engines in the plane. And they got an engine light, which is a warning on one of the engines. And as Jim knows, when that happens, you turn off that engine. The engineer turned off the wrong engine. So a plane that was supposed to fly across the planet and take all that cargo ended up not on 4 engines, but 2. And they did their best as they climbed out to try to get around and come in and land the airplane, and couldn't make it. And so the plane went in just south of the Dover Air Force Base, just south of the main runway, about a mile. The crews, the firefighting crews rushed out, and they sprayed down the airplane, tried to save as many lives as they can. Happy ending, everybody lived. Amazing ending. That's the good news. The bad news is there are 4 communities around the base that now have polluted water because of the firefighting foam. So something that was designed to save lives can also put lives at risk. And I just want to share that this is a serious matter, and one that deserves the kind of attention I think that you and your team have provided. And I can assure you that this woman right here will make sure that, given her interest from West Virginia, my native state, that we're going to give it a lot of time and attention. The time for action is here. Time for words. We need action, and we look forward to working with you. You're recognized, please.
Whatever happened to the guy that turned off the wrong engine?
I think he had suffered real psychiatric problems. I mean, imagine living with that for the rest of your life. So it's a very, very, very sad story all around. Yeah. Radhika Fox, welcome, please.
Good morning, Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito and members of the committee. I'm Radhika Fox, Assistant Administrator for Water at the EPA, as well as the co-chair of EPA's Council on PFAS. Your opening remarks really illustrated to me how much bipartisan support there is to make progress on PFAS. And so I wanted to begin by recognizing the leadership of this committee on PFAS. Chairman Carper, you have pushed to improve our understanding of the prevalence and impact of these chemicals in our community. Ranking Member Capito, your legislative efforts have helped EPA and many other agencies take important steps. The last time I testified in front of this committee, I talked about the Flint water crisis, and I shared my belief that no community in this country should suffer from environmental contamination. And I remain committed to ensuring that all people, regardless of their income, their zip code, or the color of their skin, have environmental protections in place and that their communities are safe. Today, we will discuss the complex and very serious challenge of PFAS and EPA's bold strategy to protect public health and the environment. PFAS have been manufactured and used in various applications since the 1940s, and they are still in use today. As a result, PFAS can be found nearly everywhere, in our air, in our land, in our water, in our wildlife, in our own bodies. And a growing body of scientific evidence shows us that PFAS exposure can adversely impact human and ecological health. That's why President Biden made bold commitments to protect communities from PFAS contamination, and the president appointed someone with firsthand experience to lead the EPA. And under Administrator Regan's leadership, EPA has hit the ground running as we have made significant progress in just 9 months. But what I'm really most excited about is to share our PFAS strategic roadmap, which was driven by the career experts across the EPA. We released it on Monday, and I look forward to today's discussion about it. The roadmap builds on the agency's 2019 action plan while committing to bolder and new policies to safeguard public health, protect the environment, and to hold polluters accountable. The human health and ecological risks posed by PFAS demand that the EPA attack the problem on multiple fronts and that we leverage multiple statutory authorities on behalf of the American people. The roadmap lays out a whole-of-agency approach to accelerate progress, and we have set timelines by which the agency will take specific actions. For the first time, EPA now has a comprehensive approach to addressing PFAS, and it's grounded in 3 central directives: research, restrict, and remediate. Under this plan, EPA will invest in research to better understand PFAS exposures, its impacts to human health and ecosystems, and the most effective interventions. And we're going to continue to build the scientific foundation to approach PFAS as groups, because we believe that over time, this can help us accelerate our regulatory work. We will also pursue an ambitious agenda to restrict PFAS from entering air, land, and water in the first place. That is the strongest, most foundational way we can protect communities from these forever chemicals. And we are going to broaden and accelerate our efforts to remediate PFAS contamination. When EPA sees that there is contamination, we will push for cleanup and we will hold polluters accountable. Research, restrict, remediate. These are the central directives that will guide EPA's work on forever chemicals. I also want to note that the agency's work will be prioritizing and ensuring that disadvantaged communities have equitable access to solutions, whether they're urban communities or rural communities. We have to center this work in equity. You know, each step and action identified in the roadmap is a bold step forward, but what is so exciting is the cumulative impact that these actions will have. They build upon one another, and they will lead to enduring protections for communities across America. Senators, please also know that there's a lot we still don't know about PFAS, and so EPA is going to be in a continuous mode of learning, and as EPA learns more, we will do more. And finally, EPA wants to partner. We want to partner for progress with this committee, with impacted communities around the country, with all interested stakeholders. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I really look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for that statement. And again, thank you for coming. And, I just would note for the record, my colleagues know I like to call people on their birthdays. And today's Vice President Kamala Harris' birthday. Brian Schatz, who's a senator, one of our colleagues from Hawaii, it's his birthday. And as it turns out, it's also the birthday of Sheldon Whitehouse. And often we ask whoever's witnessing to lead us in singing happy birthday to the witness. I was going to ask for a fund just to say, my first question would be, would you lead us in singing happy birthday to Sheldon Whitehouse? I'm not going to do that today. I won't put you through that
Happy
torture.
birthday, Senator.
Yeah, that's probably.
Thank you. Don't allow him to haze you this way. Now, if you wanted me to sing happy birthday, we could clear this room in a moment.
Well, Senator Whitehouse is normally the person who has the birthday, receives gifts. But for us, Sheldon is a gift from the people of Rhode Island. It's an honor to have the chance to serve with him, and especially to have his leadership on this committee. All right. We'll sing later. All right. Let me start off with a question or two on effluent guidelines. One of the key actions in the plan that you've been working on with your colleagues, one of the key actions in the plan is to limit discharges of PFAS from facilities into surface water and municipal sewage treatment plants. The roadmap mentions plans to develop rules to control discharges from the following 3 industrial sources: organic chemicals, plastics, and synthetic fibers, metal finishings, and electroplating facilities, among others. Here's my question. Would you just explain for us why the roadmap does not include plans to develop rules for 6 additional industrial sources that are listed in the PFAS action plan? And for those sources, just tell us more about the agency's plans to gather information, as well as any other next steps the agency is considering. Please.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. So, and we've actually been getting a lot of questions about how we're utilizing our effluent limitations guideline program to really tackle these industrial discharges. So I appreciate the question. So you are right. We are moving forward with rulemaking that was announced last month on the 3 industrial categories that you just named. And we anticipate completion of one of those rules by the fall of 2023 and the second one by the fall of 2024. So we have information, good information on those 3 industrial categories, and therefore we're acting and undertaking these rules. There's also a number of the industrial categories where we have some information, but not enough information to make a scientific determination if a regulation is needed. And those are around, and so in that instance, what we're doing is undertaking detailed studies to really build the record, the scientific record, to make that determination. And those are for landfills, textiles and carpeting, and electrical components. The career team anticipate those detailed studies will be complete by this time next year to inform whether or not we will undertake a rulemaking. Another category that we're moving forward with as it relates to ELGs is industries where concern has been expressed, but we don't have enough information around PFAS discharges. So those include paint formulators, plastics, and leather tanneries. And so with those 3 industrial categories, we are undertaking data reviews as well as we're going to be doing mandatory data calls on those facilities so we can learn more and then be able to make an informed decision about whether a regulation is necessary. And then the way that we're tackling, one additional approach we're taking is that there's several industries, including airports and pulp and paper manufacturers, where we understand that the use of PFAS is going to be phased out by 2023 or 2024. So in those instances, what we're doing is monitoring. And as part of our ELG Plan 15, which it'll be finalized in the fall of 2022, we'll report out to the American people about what we learned from that monitoring. So I would say we're taking a very proactive approach around the effluent limitation guidelines. We're acting when we have the information to develop the rules, and we're building the scientific foundation where we don't for future decisions. And I anticipate that we will make significant progress on all of those industrial categories by the end of 2024.
Great. Thanks for that response. My second question is around environmental justice. Ms. Fox, I think we're pleased to see that the concept of environmental justice is woven throughout the plan. It's a well-known fact that many sources of pollution, including PFAS, are disproportionately located near low-income communities and oftentimes communities of color. And the roadmap, EPA commits to ensuring that these communities have equitable access to solutions to address this critical public health issue. Here's my question. Please share with us today any specifics you may have about how the agency will prioritize the protection of disadvantaged communities through actions described in EPA's roadmap.
Yeah, happy to, Senator. So, under Administrator Regan's leadership, he has, really directed all of his AAs that, environmental justice is not a program that we have over here. It has to be woven into the very fabric of how we do our work. And that's what you see in the PFAS roadmap. So one of the things that we've committed to do is something that the NEJAC, our Environmental Justice Advisory Council, has long been asking for, which is we are going to be taking this roadmap on the road. We are going to be visiting every EPA region and meeting with those communities that are on the front lines of PFAS contamination to really get their feedback on the roadmap, what other actions they want us to be doing. And certainly members of this committee have some of these communities in your states, and so we welcome also partnering with all of you as we have those environmental justice sessions on PFAS across the country. Additionally, we're really trying to think about how we bake in environmental justice considerations into all of the rulemaking. So, for example, in my shop in the Office of Water, we are thinking about that very seriously in the context of the drinking water standard that we are moving forward with. As we do more health advisories, we're going to make sure they're in multiple languages so that all communities are understanding the health risks. So, and then we're actually utilizing EJ Screen, for example, the Office of Air and Radiation, as they're building the technical foundation to consider whether we should designate PFAS as a hazardous air pollutant. They're utilizing tools like EJ Screen as they're building that technical foundation. So we're really at every turn trying to incorporate those considerations into this work.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Capito is next. I think she's indicated a willingness to yield to Senator Inhofe. Let me just walk through the order here. It looks like it would be Senator Inhofe next, Senator Capito after him, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Kramer's joined us. Welcome to Kevin. Senator Duckworth, who's with us by WebEx, and Senator Alemus, who's with us by WebEx. A lot of interest in this hearing. The room's not full of senators, but we've got Ben Cardin after Senator Capito. I mentioned.
He'll go after Inhofe.
Okay, good enough. All right. So Jim Inhofe, Senator Cardin, and then back to Senator Capito. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much.
Well, I want to thank Senator Capito and everyone. Some are not aware that we have competing committees, and it's difficult to be two places at once. So, But I want to thank you for the time that we have spent together, and we've talked about these things. And while there's some basic differences in our philosophies and in the various areas in the jurisdiction of this committee, you're a great one to listen to and be a part of and we communicate with, and I look forward to continuing that. Now, I appreciate the conversation we had yesterday, and it's comforting to know on one issue that you're not looking, and I think it's good to state this publicly, to punish anyone. And as you know, in my major concern, as is pointed out by the chairman, I've had a lot of activity in aviation. And so it's only natural I get comments and questions from our commercial aviation community out there with this fear that they have that this suppressing material that can be used to suppress fires is something they may have a problem with because they want to be sure that the airport operators are not going to be held responsible for something over which they really have no control. Now, we talked about that yesterday, and I'm not sure what you can say that would give the maximum comfort to this community. Let's give it a try.
Yeah, no, I mean, Senator, well, first of all, it's lovely to see you again. But, what I would say is you pointed out an issue that really requires very strong interagency coordination. If FAA or DOD are requiring that airport operators are utilizing this firefighting foam and it then causes Pfas contamination that that they may be responsible for, if their PFAS are designated as a hazardous substance under CERCLA, it's really our responsibility as federal agencies to work together to kind of iron out those things. My understanding, we're working closely with FAA and DOD to first find alternatives to firefighting foam, safe alternatives that don't have PFAS. There's really great progress being made, so I think the industry is going to be moving in that direction. But really, that's really critically important, and in part because of the need for this type of interagency coordination of various policies. Brenda Mallory, the chair of White House Council for Environmental Quality, just on Monday launched an interagency council that has the deputy secretaries working together to resolve these kinds of things. So, but I can assure you, Senator, we're not looking to, punish airport operators if they're following direction and they're following guidance provided by FAA. We've got to figure out.
Yeah, I understand that, and the guidance is out there, but the problem is it's not done yet. And the problem is some disaster could happen in the meantime. And these people are out there not being able to answer the question, what happens if we have a desire? And we have material that we are not able to use. So the problem is still a problem. And I understand, and you were very emphatic to me, that you are personally involved in looking into it and trying to get the White House to do the same thing. But it's not done yet. Now, I need to have you thought about having some kind of an exemption put in place that could work? But I'd almost have to carry something back to give some comfort to individuals who have expressed that concern.
So we are very early in the rule development process for the CERCLA hazardous designation, and we anticipate proposing that rule in the spring of 2022, so in about 6 months or so. And there is going to be a robust process of both interagency review of the proposed rule as well as robust opportunity for public comment on the rule itself before we get to a final rule the following year. So, I can't prejudge the outcome of the rule, Senator. It has to go through that regulatory process. But I hear you loud and clear on this concern, and you have my commitment that I will take this concern back to the leadership in the Office of Land and Emergency Management, who are leading the development of that proposed rule.
All right. Well, that's. I will try to participate in a little area of comfort for these people and maybe be calling up and asking you to reach in some other areas that might offer some type of temporary relief. I know that my time is about to expire, but I did want to talk about what the EPA does not have plans to use the WOTUS in regulatory process as an excuse to impose new regulatory burdens in the name of climate change. Now, we did talk about that. Is there any comment you can make very briefly on that? Because that is a concern that we have.
Yeah, I would ask you to be brief in your response, and then you can respond more fully for the record, but go right ahead.
Absolutely. I'm happy to respond more fully for the record, but the answer is no. We are not using the WOTUS rule in that way.
Thank you very much.
That was pretty brief.
That's brief, yeah.
Yeah, not every witness is that brief.
Very, very brief, though, Mr. Chairman. That is, because I think I know what our answer is, that can you confirm that these important agricultural exemptions can be maintained?
I'm happy to give an in-depth answer in the questions for the record on that as well.
I'll live with that.
All right, good, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. I think Jim Inhofe may have more flight hours than anybody in the Senate, except maybe for John, the late my colleague from the Vietnam War, John McCain, and my guess is Mark Kelly, who's a member of this former he's Navy captain, fighter pilot.
Yeah, well,
and
I have more
three of you.
hours than the two of them put together, but they have more miles than I do.
Well, all of you have bragging rights then. All right.
Kelly had more altitude.
You got it?
Something for everybody. All righty. Senator Cardin, I think, is joining us by WebEx. Ben, are you out there? Earth calling Senator Cardin. Come in, Ben. All right, we'll wait for him to join us. We got, as Senator Inhofe said, we got a lot of committees going, meeting at the same time. So, Senator Capito, I think you're on, please.
Well, I think, do you want to go to Senator Whitehouse, to Democrat? Go ahead. You're good? Okay, thank you. Well, welcome again. And the first question I have is a little bit along the same lines as Senator Inhofe. You and I spoke briefly, and I mentioned a possible case study of a wastewater plant that would then remove the PFOA or PFAS from the water in terms of cleaning it, but then have biosolids left over and the disposal of those. There is some concern about what would the liabilities be for a wastewater that, basically they didn't create it, they're trying to clean it up, yet they have to dispose of that. If you could clarify the liability issue, what you all are looking at that, much like what Chairman Inhofe said.
Absolutely. So I think you mean, Senator, in the context of designating PFOA and PFOS as a hazardous substance under CERCLA liability. Yeah, so, as with other hazardous substances that have long, been established as hazardous under CERCLA, there's a process that's followed. So if a CERCLA designation is made on these two PFAS chemicals, it does a couple of things. One, it requires that facilities report in a quantifiable way on potential releases. But then in order to have liability, there's also a responsibility to show who is responsible for that PFAS release, and then a court determination. So there's a process that's long been in place for a range of hazardous substances under CERCLA, and should PFAS be named a hazardous substance, if we get to that final rule, it would be the same way. And then, since you also asked about biosolids, separately from the liability issue, one of the key actions that we are taking in the roadmap is to begin a risk assessment, because there's a lot that we don't know around the human health and ecological effects of PFAS and biosolids. So we're also undertaking greater research to have that risk assessment in place in the next couple of years.
All right, thank you. Let's kind of take it down a little bit if somebody's watching this and they don't know what PFOA, PFAS is, although we've said it's everywhere, which we know that is true in certain levels. The drinking water level, there is a level right now that is a suggested level, I guess, of safety. But you, in your strategic roadmap, have done something that I've been pressing for both through the last administration and this one, is to set a definitive level that's science-based, that we can know what our kids and grandkids are drinking, and we're drinking, has an acceptable level. But in the roadmap, the length of time that this is going to take is very frustrating to me, because we've been looking at this, gosh, I've probably been involved with this issue 2 or 3 years. And why is it going to take so long when we know that the Office of Water can move more quickly? And if you could just explain to people who are listening right now what that level might be right now, and how you anticipate that this lengthy period of time is going to change that level.
Yeah, I mean, Senator Capito, I share your frustration. I mean, we should have had a drinking water standard for PFOA and PFOS years ago. And so Administrator Regan and I, we are trying to make up for lost time in moving forward this designation. Why it's so lengthy, why it takes so long is, we have to follow the science and we have to follow the law as we develop these regulations. And many of those steps and processes are established by Congress.
Right.
They're embedded in the Safe Drinking Water Act. I will say that we are very much trying to meet the statutory deadline, beat the statutory deadline of March 2023. So we intend to propose a rule by the fall of 2022. We will take, all of the interagency review and feedback. We will take ample public comment. It's such an important rule. We have to get it right. And then we are aiming to have that rule in place by 2023. We are not taking it lightly. We are concerned about communities who have been waiting far too long for such protections as a drinking water standard would provide. But please know we are moving with all deliberate speed, but we want to get something that's right, something that's durable, and that's grounded in science.
Well, I want it to be right, and I want it to be grounded in science, but I am frustrated. And as looking through the roadmap, all of the different aspects of this, there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of things to do without finding a better way of stating that. So I would urge you, because I think this drinking water level is so very, very important, to prioritize this at the, if not the top, near the top of the list, because of the impacts it will have all across this country. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Capito, thank you for your continued interest in leadership on this area. I don't know if you've been figuring out where the road trip you're going to be taking across the country is going to, as you unveil the roadmap, if that roadmap might take you through West Virginia, but that would sort of
I'm still waiting for my invitation, Senator.
Anytime, we're happy to have you.
The welcome mat is out. Senator Cardin tried to join us by WebEx a little bit ago, and he couldn't, and was unable to because of the technology, but he's here live and in person, and I'm going to yield to him right now.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was with you with WebEx because I was in my car, but now that I'm here in person, I didn't want to miss the opportunity with being Administrator Fox. So that was, I wanted to, and thank you very much. And I'm going to follow up on the chair and the ranking member on the water standards. Let me just point out, that all of us have examples in our states. In Maryland, the city of Westminster and the town of Hampstead have had to take their treatment plants off service because of high samples collected with high measured levels of PFOAs and PFS. So we see this directly, and we recognize that we're in desperate need of having a national standard. And based upon best science, we know the risk factors. And the good news from the point of view of congressional support, it's bipartisan, it's strong, and we're prepared to put up resources necessary to do the remedial work, as is obvious in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So I appreciate your sense of urgency. And I just really want to underscore the point on timing. I recognize you've got to get it right. I understand that the process issues require an orderly process where you can have input. But if we continue to delay these issues being regulated appropriately, it's going to be even more challenging in the future. So I just want to first urge you to move these issues as quickly as possible. I know you're going down several tracks according to the game plan that you laid out. Some are a little bit more ready to move on than others. But if you could just share with us your time schedule that you see as realistic in order to implement your plan.
On the drinking water standard?
Well, you can do drinking water. You also, I know there's other parts of your program.
Absolutely. So one thing that we did with the roadmap, Senator, is put anticipated timelines on all of the actions, and ongoing. So, for example, we just on Monday announced our Pfas testing strategy, and the first test orders are going to be coming out in a matter of weeks. It's imminent that we're going to be releasing a Gen X toxicity assessment and follow that on with a health advisory. So we are really firing on all cylinders and across all of our media offices to make progress on things, delivering in the short term as well as long term. On the drinking water standard, I just want to reiterate the need for urgency that you just spoke of, that Senator Capito just spoke of. It is one of the keystone rules that we have to put in place during Administrator Regan's tenure, and we're very focused on that. We actually will, we're moving quite rapidly with the building the foundation for that rule. We just started did a nomination for the small business participation just yesterday. The Science Advisory Board is going to be meeting by the end of the year. And as I said, we are on track to propose the rule by this time next year.
So let me ask you about your partnerships with states in dealing in this roadmap with support for fisheries and seafood safety. In Maryland, we have taken considerable strides to better understand the occurrence of PFAS in fish tissue, oysters, and crabs. Do you have in your roadmap working with our states so that we can advance the science necessary to understand the risk factors and the remedial actions necessary in regards to our safe food stock?
Absolutely. We're going to be working very closely with states, and tribes, our co-regulators, in building out the actions in this roadmap. ECOS, which is, the Environmental Council of the Environmental Secretaries from across the country, they're a partner in these efforts with us. And the truth is, as you know, Senator, there's a number of states who have been leading when the federal government hasn't done enough. So that partnership with the states is going to be critical. And I'm so glad that you asked about the fish tissue issue. There's a number of things that we're doing on that front. We're basically in the process of developing ambient water quality criteria, which is essential for states and tribes as they're setting water quality standards around PFAS. We also are doing a lot of work around fish advisories because our early sampling in places like the Great Lakes show that there's some level of PFAS in nearly every fish sample. So we are also working to build out the science and the information that states need and tribes also need to do these fish advisories, which is, of course, really critically important for subsistence fishers, for the seafood industry, as you mentioned, as well as for our tribal nations who consume larger numbers of fish.
Well, we look forward to working with you on that. I think we're partnering with our states is going to be critically important, particularly on the fish stock. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cardin, thank you so much for joining us and for your leadership on this and other issues as well. Just to run briefly through the ordering of questions. Looks like the next person up is Senator Kramer, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Bozeman, and Senator Duckworth by WebEx. So Senator Kramer, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Fox, for being here and for your service. It's great to see you again. I'm gonna maybe steer this a little bit along the same path that Senator Cardin was just talking about, or that you were talking about in response to his very specific question, and that is, you referenced your co-regulators, state and tribal regulators, and I'm just going to draw a little bit of an illustration and let you expand on it. So I think the EPA first came into North Dakota in 2013, 2015, did some baseline sampling, found basically didn't find any PFAS, at least of the 6 most prominent, most often present chemicals. And then in 2018, the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality did a much larger baseline survey, and certainly found some, but again, very minor, nothing really that affected drinking water significantly, or really in any dangerous way. There are a couple of fire safety sites or training facilities, but again, good cleanup, and we're blessed with a geology that protects the water table pretty well. So all in all, things are pretty good. I draw that little bit of an illustration because many of our water systems, like many of the members here, of course, are rural water systems. Not a lot of financial resources, spread out population, a chemical that largely doesn't exist or barely exists. So as you're doing the roadmap, I was heartened by like I said, what you just said to Senator Cardin. And maybe if you could just expand a little bit on that, that relationship with tribes and states, and how to craft rules that aren't overly burdensome to particularly rural systems that if needed, I guess we could help finance, but we don't want to burden them if it's unnecessary. Just talk through that a little bit with me about how you see that relationship working out.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's good to see you, Senator Kramer. I think one of the best tools that we have as we think very thoughtfully about partnering with our co-regulators, the state, is the leadership that Administrator Regan brings. As a state environmental regulator, he's very attuned to the importance of being in partnership with the states, not telling states what to do, but figuring it out together. And we're really aspiring to do that, not only in our PFAS work, but in all of the rules that we're undertaking at EPA. So with each of the actions that are regulatory in nature in the roadmap, whether it's the CERCLA hazardous designation or the drinking water standard, we will have ample and robust dialogue with states. We have formal consultations with states and tribes on each and every one of these rules. We have to make sure it's meeting the needs, the very diverse needs of states across the country. So you certainly have Administrator Regan's commitment, my commitment to do that, both in PFAS, but again, in all of the things that we're doing at EPA.
Speaking as a former state regulator, I find that background of Administrator Regan's to be one of the more endearing qualities, and he's got lots of them, but we regulators don't often talk endearingly about one another. Anyway.
I will make sure to let him know you said that.
I appreciate that. Well, along the same theme then, let's talk just a little bit about WOTUS, since we have a minute and a half left, because it is kind of the same lines. And I know you find yourself one rule, then not, and then a new rule, and then now not, and the NWPR, which we in North Dakota thought was a pretty good rule, not perfect, but pretty clearly defined the role of states and the role of the federal government, and encourages everybody to stay in their own lane. But now we're on path to what you like to call a more durable rule, perhaps, and I think we'd all like a more durable or a sustainable rule that doesn't have to get ping-ponged between administrations and courtrooms. So that said, maybe just talk a little bit about, and thank you for your commitment to come out to my little state and talk to some people that deal with a very, very diverse landscape as it relates to water and WOTUS. Talk a little bit about your approach to that now that you're partway through this discovery process in coming up with a new permanent rule.
Absolutely, and I'm looking very much forward to the visit as well. So, my approach, my position on waters of the United States hasn't changed since I was last before this committee. We have over the summer and early fall been doing very robust engagement, pre-publication engagement around waters of the United States. As I think we've described in other settings, we're still moving forward with a two-step rulemaking process. The first rule is, a rule to promulgate the kind of pre-2015 regulations. And then we'll move forward with a second rule to get to, to build on that foundation. Of course, Senator, the landscape continues to change around waters of the United States. As we, Army and EPA, continue this work, two district courts in Arizona and New Mexico have both vacated the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. So based on those two court decisions, the concerns that those two courts had, we have instructed both the regional EPA regional offices as well as the Army district offices to move forward with implementation of that 1986 regulatory regime. And so that is currently what the law of the land is until we move forward with our rulemaking. We do anticipate proposing that step one rule before the end of the year, by the end of 2021. And when we propose that, we will again do ample and robust stakeholder engagement in North Dakota and really around the country.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Senator Capito, and welcome, Ms. Fox. I'm glad you're back with us again. I wanted to just flag Rhode Island's situation for you as we have a moment here together. In 2019, our Department of Health tested every major drinking water supply in the state and the water in every school that had its own well. We still have a lot of well supply in Rhode Island. 80% of Rhode Islanders through this process had their primary source of water tested, so it was pretty comprehensive. And Pfas chemicals were detected in 44% of the locations tested. Drinking waters serving 14 different Rhode Island cities and towns like North Providence and Pawtucket, Newport, Cumberland, and South Kingstown tested positive for Pfas at levels that have already been declared unsafe under the standards of neighboring states. Elevated levels were detected in school water systems in Foster, in Gloucester, in North Smithfield, in Scituate, and at our wonderful University of Rhode Island. PFAS contamination was perhaps unsurprisingly also found at Naval Station Newport. We are now following federal guidance by requiring people to avoid drinking water that has PFOA or PFOS in levels above 70 parts per trillion. But Massachusetts sets that limit at 20 parts per trillion combined for 6 of the most common PFAS compounds, and Vermont also sets a limit of 20 parts per trillion combined for 5 PFAS compounds. So our Department of Health has begun work on its own PFAS regulations and is working on drafting our state-level drinking water standard. In February, our Department of Environmental Management signed on to a letter with other state environmental agencies in New England highlighting for you specific efforts that the EPA could take to help federal, state, and local governments address PFAS, including expanding maximum containment level rules beyond PFOA and PFOS, regulating PFAS as a class, developing guidance for disposal of PFAS products, and recognizing stricter state-level standards where they exist compared to federal standards. I would ask you to please review that letter, and it would be helpful if you could send me an updated reply as to where you all are with respect to the various proposals to you that the states have made.
Well, first of all, Senator, happy birthday.
Thank you.
And absolutely, I would be happy to follow up with a formal reply. I'd also be happy to meet with some of the stakeholders and leaders you just described in Rhode Island. We'd love to learn from their experience and make sure, we're getting what we do right. So happy to commit to doing that.
Great. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank
Keep
you.
going.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Again, thanks for letting us share your birthday, special day with you.
I
And next, Senator Lomas. Thank you for your patience.
No,
Thanks for
thank you,
joining us.
Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Welcome, Ms. Fox. Senator Kramer and I, before he walked out of the room, were talking about how grateful we are that we don't have nearly the PFAS issues identified that Senator Whitehouse just mentioned exist in his state. And I think it's a perfect example of why federalism works so well. According to the Environmental Council of the states, states have assumed more than 96% of the delegable authorities under federal environmental laws. And so concerning PFAS, there's no reason states can't or shouldn't lead on research and regulation. Senator Whitehouse just mentioned that his state certainly is doing so and has identified many issues in his state that do need to be addressed. So in this area and a lot of areas at EPA, working with the states, the concepts of federalism seem to be the best path, the workable path going forward. So I just want to implore EPA to see the states as partners and work with them and to accept their leadership in a lot of areas where they're well positioned to lead. I too, like Senator Kramer, want to raise the issue of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule while we're here, because that is the more concerning issue in my state, as it is in his state of North Dakota, than quite frankly the PFAS issue is. And so one of my concerns about it is the amount of delay we've seen coming from the Agency on Oversight requests for information on the repeal and replacement of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. For example, it took the agency 9 weeks to provide this committee with a briefing on the rationale underlying the agency's decision to take these actions. And, you know, that delay causes states like mine a real heartburn. And we're concerned about transparency that we think is not evident with regard to the times involved in this. So I just want to alert you that we have great concerns about the replacement of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, and we very much want as much information as we can get. Now, do you agree that 9 weeks is too long for this committee to wait for a briefing on this issue?
So, Senator, thank you for sharing your concerns around delays in responding to oversight requests. I am happy. I don't manage that for the EPA, and so you have my commitment that I will take that concern back to Administrator Regan and to those at EPA who manage that, and see if we can't, act more quickly. Of course, we have so many things we're juggling. But we will be more mindful of that moving forward. And I just also wanted to appreciate your comments about letting the states lead and really partnering with them so that we get these regulations right. I could not agree with you more. And I would say that, it really is the obligation of the EPA to protect public health and safeguard the environment by establishing federal floors for things. And, so much of what we're trying to do with this roadmap is to establish that federal floor of protection for people who have been suffering far too long from PFAS contamination. And we fully expect that other states will go farther than us, and they should lead, and we will learn from them. And it will, I think, be a very virtuous cycle of partnership between states and the federal government moving forward.
Well, thank you. I think the illustration of the big differences between states in dealing with this issue and having it be an issue for each of us would argue for having the states take a strong leadership position and then ask for assistance from the EPA when necessary. And certainly in a lot of areas, the EPA is well equipped to help the states fulfill their roles in this area as well. I want to return, and I know this isn't your area, but I hope that you will take back with you Wyoming's concern about changing the navigable waters protection rule. On a briefing call, staff stated that there actually have been no observed and documented significant environmental damage or ongoing environmental harm stemming from the implementation of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. And because of that, we don't even understand why you want to change it, why the agency wants to change it. It seems to be working well, and we have concern that we're going to be taking a step backwards with regard to changes with those rules. So are you aware of any significant environmental damage or ongoing environmental harm stemming from the current implementation of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule that's been observed either by EPA or the Army Corps of Engineers?
So, Senator, the Navigable Waters Protection Rule is no longer the definition of waters of the United States. It was vacated by 2 district courts, and so we are currently implementing the regulatory regime pre-2015. So courts have found that the navigable had significant concerns, and that's why they took that action.
Did they take the concern because of they felt that it was inadequately implemented under the rulemaking authority, or because the rule was inadequately actually protective of waters? Do you know which it was? Was it procedural or was it substantive?
So I would be happy to have our Office of General Counsel brief you more fully on those 2 court decisions, if that would be of interest to you, Senator.
It absolutely would, and I very much appreciate the offer, and I'll take you up on that.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you for your willingness to do that. And,
Absolutely.
we're grateful. I believe Senator Duckworth is ready to join us on WebEx. And Senator Duckworth, if you're there, please join us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to start off by associating myself with the comments from Senator Inhofe about the concerns that airports have for being held liable for use of PFAS, AFFF retardants. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, I think no other senator has as much flight time that is as slow and as low to the ground as I do. So all you guys are all jet jocks.
There's a lot of record holders here, we have. And one of them coming in right now. Coming in
if you want to go very slowly and at 300 feet or less above ground, I'm your gal.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, as chair of the Water Subcommittee and a fellow founding member of and co-chair of the Senate's first Environmental Justice Caucus, I commend your leadership in making sure our committee pays as much attention to upgrading our country's unseen infrastructure as we provide for the resources for fixing our roads, bridges, and rail. And I'm proud that working together, we have secured record funding levels for water infrastructure across the bipartisan infrastructure bill, including more than $10 billion dedicated to PFAS cleanup. These historic investments would deliver significant benefits to low-income communities, in particular, rural areas as well, and communities of color. And it will help right the past wrongs of allowing our military families and industrial communities to bear the brunt of toxic chemical dumping. Administrator Fox, now that your team has put forward the most comprehensive PFAS plan in EPA's history, could you address how preserving the robust water infrastructure funding in the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Buildback Better Act would enhance EPA's ability to provide clean, safe, reliable water for all Americans?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for the question. So we are very excited by the comprehensive nature of the roadmap, and we were really intentional about identifying what we can do with our existing resources. But, the bipartisan infrastructure package and the Build Back Better plan would be a game changer in our ability to address PFAS. For example, the $10 billion that is proposed in the bipartisan the bill that this committee led the development of and passed through the Senate. I mean, that $10 billion would be a game changer for communities in being able to do cleanups, making sure drinking water, wastewater systems are safe and PFAS free. So those dollars are essential. But beyond the resources for PFAS that are in that legislation, the rest of the resources that would be going to building and reinvesting in our drinking water and wastewater systems, removing lead service lines, really retiring them so that communities have lead-free water. All of these things are desperately needed in our communities. Communities have been waiting too long for these investments. And what I can say is, under Administrator Regan's leadership, we stand ready to steward these resources, if passed by Congress, safely, responsibly, efficiently, to, again, support our communities in living the healthiest lives possible.
Thank you. I'm going to return to the firefighting use of aqueous firefighting foams that contain PFAS and other PFAS, long-chain PFAS. I mean, we've known for decades that these are a dangerous risk to public health, and despite this knowledge, we've continued to use these harmful foams to put out industrial fires, and in the process, they've now seeped into our ground. We've been talking about this all morning. But most Americans don't know we're still using them. I mean, in my home state of Illinois, AFFF has been used in 3 separate incidents in just the last several months. This includes a battery storage fire where AFFF was used for hours until EPA was finally consulted and advised that they should stop using AFFF immediately and procure non-PFAS foams. And just last week, 50,000 gallons of AFFF were dumped at the Sugar Camp coal mine, and now the local area has contamination levels of serious concerns. Of course, Illinois is not alone in this. AFFF represents a national public health threat that touches upon the 3 core components of EPA's PFAS roadmap. Ms. Fox, can you address how implementing the roadmap's 3 central directives will enable us to proactively prevent the use of PFAS foams, making sure that we strengthen the cleanup efforts in communities where this foam has already been used, and also support research and development to promote non-PFAS firefighting foams and other alternative technologies?
Absolutely, Senator. We are doing our part at the EPA to help transition away from these firefighting foams that have PFAS in them, as well as supporting remediation and cleanup. But this is really an area where we need a whole of government approach to really solve this issue. FAA and DOD are also working very hard on this issue. But because we need a whole of agency approach, the White House just this week announced that under Chairman Brenda Mallory's leadership, there's a deputy secretary level interagency council, and we really view the council as a place for this type of cross-agency challenge to be solved together. And so this is a priority for us. It's a priority across the administration, and we are really looking to make rapid progress moving forward.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm out of time, so.
You don't have to yield back, but thanks so much for coming. Thanks for the insights that you've offered. We've been joined by Senators Stabenow, but before her is Senator Mark Kelly. We've been talking a lot about PFAS, and especially with respect to firefighting foams today, something you know a lot about. Mark, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, in my early days in the Navy, I spent time with the hose and the AFFF putting out fires for training, not realizing at the time that that chemical was going to do so much harm to groundwater across the country. So that's what I want to talk about, the PFAS issue. So thank you, Administrator Fox, for being here today. It was great talking to you last week and seeing you again. As you know, Arizona is in the midst of a historic drought. In August, the Bureau of Reclamation declared a Tier 1 shortage on the Colorado River, cutting back Arizona's allocation of Colorado River water for the first time ever. While Arizona has spent years making investments to prepare for this, to prepare for the Tier 1 shortage, recent hydrological reports indicate that in the not-too-distant future, we could quickly get to Tier 2 or even Tier 3, those shortages. This would prompt significant cuts for communities throughout our state. If these cuts are triggered, communities in Phoenix and in Tucson and the surrounding areas may have to rely on their secondary source of drinking water, which is groundwater. Yet, as you know, there are significant and growing PFAS plumes in aquifers, both in Phoenix and in the Tucson metropolitan areas. These competing challenges makes remediating the PFAS plumes in Arizona's aquifers an urgent priority. That's why I fought to include $10 billion in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for PFAS cleanup efforts. While the House still needs to pass the bill, I wanted to ask you today about EPA's plan for quickly getting this much-needed funding out to states if and when the bill is signed into law. So, Administrator Fox, what can you share about the work your office is doing to prepare to quickly allocate funding provided for PFAS cleanup in the infrastructure bill?
Thank you, Senator Kelly, for that question. So absolutely, if and when the infrastructure bill is passed, EPA is ready to go. We are having conversations with states. You know, a lot of the infrastructure money will flow by formula through the SRF formula to states. So we're working actively with states to really understand, you know, what might be their challenges, how do we anticipate and plan for them, how do we make sure projects are ready to go, especially with these carve-outs for the $10 billion for PFAS and then the carve-out for lead. So we're ready to act quickly. We know communities desperately need these resources to ensure that they have safe, clean drinking water and reliable wastewater service. I also just want to underscore, you know, Senator, the story that you just told about Arizona, it's so sobering to me because it shows us all of the unintended consequences of decisions that we make and why we actually need a more one water approach, right? That the fact that this drought situation may lead communities in Arizona to rely on groundwater that's contaminated with PFAS. I mean, that's just awful, right? So we really need to be attuned to the interconnected nature of these water challenges. It's why Administrator Regan has charged us with our PFAS roadmap to use every statutory authority to bring our funding and financing programs to bear, not tackle it one PFAS at a time, you know, one chemical at a time or one exposure pathway at a time. So you certainly have our commitment at EPA that we are ready to act. We are ready to steward resources wisely to communities, and that we want to really bring a more integrated, comprehensive approach so that as we make future decisions, right, on water management, it doesn't create yet another unintended consequence.
Right. So, yeah, thank you for that. And, you know, that is going to help. When we talk about where Arizona is going to be in 2 to 3 years, the storage, the water in Lake Mead went down 10% in a year, and it's at 30%. And Arizona gets 40% of its water from the Colorado River. It's at 1,067 feet above sea level. When it gets to 1,050, which is possible in a year or two, then we're in Tier 2. Then we're in the situation where we have to rely on groundwater for drinking water. And the PFAS plumes, the one in Tucson, by the way, got so significant that the facility to take the PFAS out of the water was just overwhelmed by too much PFAS. Couldn't do it, had to shut down. So I appreciate the administrator's focus on this. It is critically important that we get these funds as soon as the bill is passed, that we get these funds to Arizona to start this remediation. Thank you.
Senator Kelly, thanks so much. We've been rejoined by Senator Joni Ernst, and I'm going to yield to you now, and then once you've asked whatever questions you'd like to, then Senator Stapp and I will ask her question, and she'll do it with the gavel in hand. There you go. And unless Senator Capito comes back and wrestles it away from you. So, but thank you, and I'm going to run and vote, and if you just preside in my absence, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Senator
you,
Ernst,
Chairman
thank you.
Carper. Thank you very much. And Administrator Fox, we're already seeing broad and costly policies implemented by the administration on an unjustified basis. And they're increasing energy costs on American families. They're harming our international economic competitiveness, and they're placing unnecessary burdens on our nation's taxpayers. And we seem to be seeing a lot of this coming out of the EPA as well, with a huge target on agriculture. I have continually fought for our farmers, and I'm afraid we're now back in the same fight that we had over waters of the United States. And I know that you're coming out with a proposal here in the upcoming weeks, and I'm concerned that what we may see will just be a return to the harmful policies we saw under the Obama administration. Now, the EPA has told this committee and our staff during a briefing that you would not be removing the exemptions for prior converted croplands. Are you able to confirm that?
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate the smart decision. I do. I am very concerned about other provisions that we have seen used by the Obama administration against our farmers. And since you were able to confirm the details about prior converted croplands, you should be able to tell us kind of what other ag-related implications or elements we should expect to see. Do you have some of those that you could detail with us today?
So, Senator, I cannot prejudge the outcome of a rulemaking. We will be proposing our Waters of the United States Step 1 rule. We anticipate by the end of the year there will be ample engagement with the agricultural community, with your state, with a range of stakeholders through the formal process.
Yes, and I appreciate that, because we will need to have that stakeholder engagement to make sure that we're not putting in place policies that would further harm our farmers and our ranchers. And again, just want to reiterate my huge concerns with the Obama era navigable waters, or waters of the U.S. Rule. And I know that Senator Lummis also was asking about the repeal of navigable waters, but I'd like to go back to what she was discussing, and the issues that were raised on WOTUS are the claims that you and others in the administration have made about environmental damage and harm that was caused by the Trump administration's navigable waters protection rule. And that's not really anything that our farmers are seeing on the ground. And I have not seen any data from the EPA or the Corps that shows the federal government has documented any of this damage and harm. So I think for Senator Lummis and I, we would like to see evidence of that rather than just a hypothetical. It's an assumption, and you're basing an unnecessary repeal and a rewrite of the rule on information that has not been provided to any of us. So can you confirm that the EPA has documented evidence of actual environmental damage or harm that was caused by the Navigable Waters Protection Rule?
So, Senator, I am happy to share with you the Army Corps' data, which is publicly available, so I can share that with you. I do want to also just reinforce that 2 district courts have vacated the Navigable Waters Protection Rule because they felt it had significant concerns with the rule and its consistency with the ultimate objectives of the Clean Water Act. And so we are now trying to look forward and to develop a rule that is fair, that is balanced, and that is durable. We think the ping pong that has happened for far too long on waters of the United States needs to stop. And that is really Administrator Regan and my priority as we undertake this rulemaking. We have, I think, time and again been illustrating our commitment to listen to all sides, to hear the divergent perspectives from regions across the country. In fact, just last week, we announced a call for hosting 10 regional roundtables. We would love if folks in Iowa would propose for one of those regional roundtables to be in Iowa so that we can dig in more deeply. But, you know, I think from the day Administrator Regan has taken office, he's committed to listening to all sides. And we have been doing that consistently with the agricultural community, and we will continue to do so.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And I think that we would be more than happy to host one of those roundtables in our great state of Iowa, because the Navigable Waters Protection Rule was one that was put in place. It was greatly appreciated over the past administration's WOTUS rule. But again, what we want to see is the evidence, not just that we've had a couple of courts that have said, you know, we should vacate the rule, but we want to see the evidence, because EPA is claiming that there was actual environmental damage caused by the Navigable Waters rule. Not just that they've vacated the rule, but we want to see that evidence. So I hope that as we do these roundtables and we're able to have a dialogue, that evidence is presented. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Assistant Administrator Fox. I appreciate you and the administrator reaching out, certainly in Michigan, and the efforts to really listen to all of our residents in every part of the economy in Michigan. And as a state that's surrounded by water, there are so many issues that I could ask you about today. But I want to specifically focus on PFAS, and thank you for your leadership and the leadership the EPA is showing. As you and I have discussed, Michigan has had significant challenges when it comes to working with the Department of Defense to address PFAS contamination on and around our military bases. PFAS has been detected on at least 10 bases in Michigan. At one base, we have had readings as high as 32,200 parts per trillion, which is huge. And at some of our bases, such as Worth Smith and Camp Grayling, we have PFAS migrating off the base and into lakes, other water bodies. I've seen PFAS contaminated foam floating across the lakes. It's terrible what is happening. It's really frightening. On July 22nd, 2020, the state of Michigan finalized its own drinking and groundwater standards for numerous PFAS. And it's my understanding that current law is clear. In the absence of national drinking and groundwater standards, the Department of Defense is required to comply with state standards. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that the Defense Department interprets the statute the way that we do, that I believe that it should be interpreted, and I've had trouble getting a straight answer. So let me ask you, do you agree that federal statute requires the Department of Defense to comply with state drinking and groundwater standards for PFAS if federal standards don't exist, or a state has more stringent standards than the federal one?
First of all, Senator Stabenow, I just share your concern around PFAS, and the people of Michigan have been suffering because of this contamination, and they have waited far too long for a good federal partner to walk with the state on addressing some of these issues. You know, I cannot speak for the Department of Defense, but what I will say is that we are doing everything we can at the EPA through this roadmap to restrict new PFAS from entering, to do our part in supporting remediation. We are in regular dialogue with the Department of Defense on areas of collaboration. I will take this back to the Assistant Secretary that I work at DOD to share this. And I spoke about it a little while ago, but one thing that we're incredibly excited about as well is that on Monday, the White House Council of Environmental Quality, under the leadership of Chair Mallory, has launched an interagency effort around PFAS, and it is the deputy secretaries across the agencies that are engaged in that. So I will share this there. I also want to say that, as the EPA moves forward with our actions under our authority, we are going to be putting a much stronger federal floor in place through the setting a drinking water standard, by moving forward a rule for CERCLA hazardous designation, because states have for far too long not had a federal floor when it relates to PFAS, and it's people's health that suffered. So you have that commitment from me moving forward, Senator.
Well, I appreciate that, and I really appreciate what the White House has announced, and again, the outreach efforts in Michigan around these issues, as well as the steps that you're taking with the EPA in terms of PFAS, including hard timelines for completing drinking water and cleanup standards. Our difficulty is that Michigan has taken the lead, stepped out, because we have so many contaminated sites, and we have the standards in place, and we made sure that it was clear that if there are standards in place, that the DOD sites need to follow those. And so while you're doing the great work to finalize your rules, we have a great sense of urgency about this. I have one other quick comment. I know I'm running out of time, but I do need to just ask quickly about the lead situations in Michigan. I was deeply involved, still am, with the people of Flint and the horrors around not being able to drink the water because of lead. And now we have other situations occurring, including a very important community in Benton Harbor, where we've had very troubling details emerge about high lead levels dating back now to 2018. And the governor has stepped in and is moving forward on a number of things. And they've done an October 6th decision to recommend bottled water for cooking and drinking and so on. But I wonder if you could just speak for a moment on how the EPA is working with the city and the state to address lead contamination in the near and long term, because this is such a serious issue.
I completely agree with you. We are very concerned about the lead exceedance levels in Benton Harbor that have been, as you said, Senator, going on for some time now. So we are really spending a lot of time and focus on this issue, both in the very near term. We have been working closely with the state and with some of the community groups on that bottled water distribution that the state has recently begun, as you just said. We're providing oversight over that bottled water distribution. We've asked to see their plans. We're providing technical assistance as we can. The EPA is also supporting a filter study that has 3 parts to it, and so we're proceeding with that. And then,
Let me ask on that one point, because have you gotten any results yet in terms of analyzing whether the water filters that were previously given are working? Do we know?
So the study that we're doing is moving forward. So we are going to, in the very near future, do sampling in about 300 homes to get a baseline, and then there's some follow-on filter studies that we'll be doing, but they'll be happening, within weeks. And we're happy to kind of loop back with your office to share the findings of that. So EPA is investing and undertaking that filter study. In addition, we've been working closely with both the city and the state, reviewing their data and around the corrosion control, looking at the studies around water chemistry. Really, we've kind of unleashed all of our technical experts within headquarters to help. We also did a recent inspection of the water system in Benton Harbor, and that report should be ready soon, and would be happy to brief you and your office on that. But please know that we are making this a top priority to collaborate with the state and the city and the community organizations there. The situation is serious, and we've got to bring all of our resources to bear.
Absolutely, and I appreciate also the EPA grant we were able to bring in for $5.6 million to begin replacing obviously the lead pipes and in our bipartisan infrastructure bill, and our chairman is back, all of his leadership and members in this committee. We certainly have dollars there, but from a community standpoint, when you have to drink water every day and cook with water every day and all the exposures and so on, the sense of urgency couldn't be higher for what needs to happen. So I look forward to working with you. Mr. Chairman, I'm turning the gavel back to you.
Doing double duty. She not only chairs the Agriculture Committee, she's going from this committee to the Finance Committee and filling in for Senator Wyden. So I don't know, we're going to have to pay you 3 times for this day. Thank you so much for chairing. I have maybe 2 more questions, and I don't think anyone else is coming back as far as I can tell from our members. But a question is maybe the best question I'll ask today, and that is, how can Congress help? How can we help? And sort of like, I want to ask you to make us a guided missile, if you will. I really appreciate your spending time with us today and providing some of the details of the roadmap that you and your colleagues have been working on. And I'm encouraged that the agency is giving was a real critical health threat in a lot of our states the close attention that it has deserved and certainly deserves going forward. Virtually all Americans, whether they know it or not, are exposed to PFAS substances, which never break down. And they tend to accumulate, as we know, in the tissues of living things, including all of us. And this is truly, I think what you presented is my staff's described as a soup to nuts plan, and which is nicer than they've described some other plans that we've received on other issues. But I can appreciate the amount of work that it will take to get all this done. And just tell us what the Congress could do, ideally, we could do to help EPA succeed with this effort, either through legislation or maybe additional resources, please.
Well, thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
So I would say there's 3 ways that Congress could be invaluable. So one, as you know, Senator, EPA was eviscerated during the Trump administration. We lost 1,000 career staff, science and intellectual capacity that we have to rebuild. So the kinds of investments in EPA that are proposed in the FY 2022 budget are just the kind of things that we need to help build back the EPA. So those resources to rebuild the very foundation of our agency. 2, passing the infrastructure bill that this committee led would be invaluable. The $50 billion investment in water would be historic for communities across America, and that $10 billion proposed for PFAS would be a huge down payment on getting our drinking water systems, our wastewater systems clean and safe, PFAS-free.
How much again?
There was $10 billion for PFAS. And then the third is, I know this committee is contemplating future legislation on PFAS. There's the PFAS Action Act from the House. So as PFAS legislation moves, we would love to be in discussion with Congress about additional authorities, statutory authorities that might enable EPA to go faster. When we wrote this roadmap, when we put the commitments that we have made in this roadmap down, the charge from Administrator Regan was, use every statutory authority that you currently have, and that's what we're trying to do with this roadmap. But there are places where Congress, through additional authority, could help us move faster, and we welcome that dialogue with you moving forward.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. I think this will be the last question I have. It may be the last question of this hearing. But as you know, many communities across our country have suffered a whole lot by being continuously exposed to PFAS in their environment, in our environment. One example, I come from I say the 49th largest state. That would be the second. We're like really small, and but every one of our 3 Delaware counties, we only have 3 counties. Most people live up in north in Newcastle County, Kent County is where Dover Air Force Base is in the middle, and in Sussex County is one of the largest counties in America. But have a lot of chickens, not many people. And but anyway, small state, 3 counties. Every one of our counties has been plagued by the presence of PFAS. in our drinking water. A key component of EPA's roadmap involves holding polluters accountable through enforcement. And according to the roadmap, anyone who causes PFAS contamination will be held responsible for cleaning it up and for preventing future releases. Question. Please tell us why enforcement is a central component of the roadmap and how EPA plans to hold polluters accountable.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator
You're
Carper. And when I hear the story you just told about Delaware, the thing that really saddens me is this is what communities around the country have been suffering from for too long. They have been caught holding the bag for contamination that industry or other facilities have created, and they need help. And that's why, Administrator Regan has said loud and clear, enforcement is back at the EPA. And that, if we see that contamination exists and that there is imminent and substantial danger to communities, we will use our enforcement authority, our current enforcement authorities to act. It's also why one of the linchpin strategies in this roadmap is moving forward at long last with a rule to designate PFAS as a hazardous substance under CERCLA, because states need that tool. We need that tool to hold polluters accountable. And that is what this EPA is going to be about moving forward.
Okay. Almost every member of this committee has participated in today's hearing. It gives you an indication just how important it is. Not just the first state, Delaware, not just my native state, Shelley Capito's native state, West Virginia, but the entire United States. And we're looking for some action and looking to be a good partner with the agencies. You made a good point about the resources, making sure you have people prepared, trained, and so forth with good leadership. And part of our responsibility is to provide the money for the resources. And when we have good nominees from the administration like you, to be able to get you confirmed at work in a hurry. I want to close by just asking one last question. This would be a question from you. Is there a question that you wish had been asked, but you haven't been asked? The question you wish had been asked, but have not been asked. Go ahead. Think about that.
No, I mean, this is...
Hillary Clinton was once asked this question, I think, when she was Secretary of State, and she was being asked to testify before the House of Representatives. Democrats were in the minority, and she was hearing it lasted forever. And after about, 5 or 6 hours, she was asked the same question by one of the members. Is there a question you haven't been asked, you wish you'd been asked? And she said, I wish I'd been someone asked if I needed a bathroom break. I thought it was pretty good on the spot like that.
Yes.
Yeah. You want to ask the last question of yourself and give us a good answer? If not, we'll wrap it up.
No, I just want to say, on behalf of the entire EPA, thank you for your leadership, Senator Carper. You have been such a good partner to the EPA as we're trying to move President Biden's bold vision for the environment forward. And so just thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this really important discussion this morning.
Well, you are welcome, and thank you in return, Administrator Fox. Vodka Fox, best name of any witness in this Congress. We want to thank you for helping us to understand better, not just the goals, but the actions and the timelines of EPA's strategic PFAS roadmap. And I was talking again with Senator Capito, as whether or not the roadmap might bring you and your team through West Virginia, and I know they would love if that would happen. It would be great if you could make to the first state, but West Virginia has, as you know, suffered hugely through this. But I'm grateful to learn, we're grateful to learn how much we already know about the threat posed by some of these PFAS chemicals. I'm also encouraged that there are well-informed and rapid steps we can take to address the worst of the risks we face while gathering the knowledge we need to protect our environment, our families, and our children over the long term. In the Navy, we have a term called all hands on deck. And you've heard that, I'm sure, in any number of applications. But I also appreciate that this is an all hands on deck opportunity. Maybe I should say not just opportunity, but a necessity. And we look forward to working with you, with your team, with your EPA colleagues, as well as my ranking member, ranking member, Senator Capito, and every member of this committee, most of whom have joined us today either in person or virtually. But we want to make sure that we're doing our best to address the problems we already face and to avoid the threats in the future. Before we adjourn, a little bit of housekeeping to do, and I want to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that include records from stakeholders and other materials that relate to today's hearing. And since I'm the only one here, I'm not going to object to my unanimous consent request, so I think we'll just say without objection. Additionally, senators will be allowed to submit questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday, November 3rd. That's Wednesday, November 3rd. We will compile those questions and send them to our witnesses and ask our witnesses, in this case, our witness, to reply by Wednesday, November 17th, please. And with that, I think we normally say that the hearing's adjourned. I'll just say it's a wrap. Thanks so much. Hearing's adjourned.